Welcome, welcome, dear friends. So nice to see you all. Thanks for coming by. A wonderful crowd. We are going to talk tonight about what I like to call the last laugh. The last laugh. Does anyone know how you say laughter in Hebrew? Tzchok. Litzchok is to laugh. That's going to be the topic this evening. And the way we're going to get there is via a very unusual route, because we're about to hear a promise that was given to our great grandmother, Sarah, who was married to Abraham, and she was an elderly lady, 90 years old, and she could not have kids. She was actually physically unable to have kids or even to carry children. And this was very, very disturbing for her. At one point, she persuaded Abraham, her husband, to take on another wife called Hagar. They had a child, Ishmael. It didn't work out so well. This was actually meant to be a surrogacy. That's the way it was. Actually one of the first cases of surrogacy we see in the Torah for sure, but maybe in history. It didn't work out very, very well. However, at this point, Sarah is about to be given amazing news. And Abraham is sitting outside his tent, and his wife is inside the tent. It's an extremely hot day, and that's why Abraham is outside, because he's trying to attract guests, even though the day was extremely hot. And he sees three people walking by. And he runs out to greet them and persuades them and actually begs them. He says, please, if I've found favor in your eyes, he calls them lords. He really gives them so much kavod. And by the way, Avraham was extremely famous, extremely wealthy. He's 99 years old. He's got a lot going on. He's very wealthy, and still he finds it within himself to go and to bring these three people into his home, and he feeds them, and he offers them rest, and he gives them a 9-course meal, although he promises bread and water. Instead, he gives them so much. Actually, there were three angels. There's actually a discussion whether or not he knew they were angels. Most say that he did not. A couple of opinions say that he did know, but he still acted out as though they were humans. But according to Rashi, he did not know they were malachim, they were angels. And he brings them inside, and one says, by the way, your wife Sarah is going to have a baby. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the joy that he feels when he hears that his wife actually, we know how happy he was, because God informed him himself in last week's parasha that his wife was going to get pregnant. This angel came not to inform him, but to inform his wife. Now listen to the difference. It's going to be a subtle but important difference as to how they both react to this news. How would you think Abraham and Sarah would react to the miraculous information and revelation that they are about to have a child? A child which God had promised him for a long time, that he wasn't able to have for all these years with Sarah, and finally he's told, you're going to have this baby. So when Sarah hears about it, she bursts out laughing. She laughs out loud. V'titzchak Sarah bekirba. She laughed inside herself. Lemor saying, Acharei beloti ata li edna. I'm now an old person. I'm old. And God turns around to Avram and says, why is she laughing? Does she not believe that I, God, have the power to give a person who does not have kids for her entire life, have children? And so Shem's upset with her. She responds, I never really laughed. It was inside me. It wasn't out loud. And there's this weird conversation between God and Abraham and Sarah as they try to figure out whether her laughter was real or not. What's interesting is we have a translation of the Torah called Onkelos. Onkelos probably is after Ruth, one of the most famous and important converts to Judaism. Without Onkelos, we wouldn't understand so much of the Torah. Whenever Rashi is stuck, he goes to Onkelos. If you open up any Chumash, pretty much, you have God's words. To the left of God's words, the Torah, you have Onkelos, the Aramaic translation. And below that, you have Rashi. So whoever Onkelos was, this Roman convert, he gets his words side by side with the Torah. That's pretty good going, especially for a convert. Okay, so he answers and says, when she left, she was pretty much like, this is crazy. She actually laughed at it. If we go back and look at Abraham's reaction, it says that V'yipol Avraham al panav, Yitzchak, he also laughed, but he didn't get into trouble for it. Onkelos turns around and says about Abraham's laugh that it was one of simcha. His laughter was a laughter of happiness. Sarah's laughter, says Onkelos, was not one of happiness, it was one of mockery. She was laughing at the situation. She was laughing in disbelief. You ever have that kind of laugh before? You're like, come on, are you kidding me? I don't believe it. There's different types of laughter. Some laughter is one of joy, of happiness. Some laughter is awkward situations. And some laughters are, I can't believe it. It's just impossible. You're kidding me. So we have two laughters, and Rashi has to run to Onkelos to find out which one is which. It doesn't end there. In next week's parasha, actually at the end of this week's parasha, but it continues into next week's parasha, we see that Sarah finally has a baby. And when she finally has the baby, she does what? What will be the last thing you do after the whole embarrassing episode with God finding out you're pregnant and laughing it off, knowing full well that your husband found out and he laughed out of joy? What's her reaction at this point? She laughs again. It's like not crazy enough that she laughed when she found out. Now she's given birth, she laughs again. Sarah, Yitzchak. She bursts out laughing, and then she calls the baby laughter. Yitzchak means laughter. That's very, very strange. Interestingly, if you go to Onkelos, when he translates the word laughter, he doesn't use Sarah's earlier laughter that she mocked and couldn't believe it. He says this laughter was a laughter of happiness she had now equalized with her husband's laughter when he found out. So we have three laughters over here. Laughter number one is Abraham's laughter, that's happy. Laughter number two is Sarah's one, disbelief. The third laughter is the laughter of Sarah finally giving birth to this baby, and that is one of happiness, of simcha. And then, I guess you could call this a fourth laughter, she calls the baby little baby laughter. So strange. Had she screamed out, she would have called the baby Mr. Scream? I mean, what is going on over here? What is the secret behind this very, very important story? And what I want to show you actually is that inside this one story, there's a lot going on outside. We have Sodom and Gomorrah, we have other children being born. There's a lot going on. And yet, inside this story is not only the past, it's also the present, and it's also going to involve the future as well. So in order to understand this, we have to figure out what makes something funny. Because that's what laughter is, isn't it? Laughter is what we do when something funny happens. And that something funny is usually something we don't expect. Something that comes in an instant. Something you never expected to happen. Because if you heard a joke the first time, you laugh. If you hear a joke the second time, it's the same joke. By the third time, by the fifth time, or he should live and be well, my father, who tells the same joke 50 times, the only person laughing at that point is my father and no one else. The rest of us are groaning. My father has many, many good jokes, but sometimes he repeats them. You know that one about the watermelons, and you know the one about, come on, Abba, not again. We've heard it 50 times. I'll tell you one more time. It's not funny anymore. So what makes something funny is, says the Gaonim actually, the great rabbis, it's actually when the unexpected happens. When the last thing you expect to happen happens, the initial reaction is tzchok, is laughter, is to just laugh it out. You know, I remember watching an interview with Charlie Chaplin. And Charlie Chaplin, everyone knows who Charlie Chaplin is, yeah? You're not? Okay. You're not that young. So he obviously had all these movies, these silent movies, and he was interviewed at the end of his life, and he was asked about the secret to all of his comedy that he had produced. Right? He was a great comic actor and director and producer. And then the interview, and he said, all you need is a tramp, a little boy, a pretty girl, and a policeman, and you got yourself a perfect comedy. Put all those together, he said, and you have everything you need. And then the interviewer asked him, I remember watching this, and he said, what's the difference between British humor and American humor? Because he was actually British. And he performed in Great Britain, and then he performed in America, where he spent the rest of his life. He said, what's the difference between British humor and American humor? It's a good question. And he thought about it, and he said, I'll tell you the difference. He said, the difference is this. Imagine the camera is pointing towards a very distinguished gentleman. He's got his top hat on, he's got his fancy coat, he's got a cigar, he's full of arrogance, and he walks down the street. And then the camera pans to a banana peel. Okay, so you have big, haughty guy, banana peel. Big guy, banana peel. Big guy, banana peel. You see, in America, it's very simple. I have the guy slip on the banana peel, he falls over, he's in the dirt, everyone's laughing. But he said in Great Britain that doesn't work. You see, in Great Britain it's more difficult. I have the same scene, the same setup. I got the big fancy guy, I got the banana peel. Big fancy guy, banana peel. And the camera goes from one to the other, one to the other. And the guy's walking along, and then he sees the banana peel, he steps over it and falls in a manhole. He says, that is British humor. That little extra twist at the end. And it's actually very, very true. Friends, laughter happens. Actually, someone said, what is comedy? When bad things happen to other people. Right? Because when you fall on a banana skin, it's not funny, right? On a banana peel. But when someone else falls on a banana peel, that's funny. And we all laugh. I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? I mean, the person's sitting there, they've fallen over, right? And even the person who runs over to them to help pick them up is holding back a laugh. You can't help it. It's just funny. But it's not funny, it's terrible. Someone just fell over on a banana peel. What is so funny about that? I'm going to explain to you. First of all, I want to tell you about the first ever joke in Jewish history. And that joke actually is found in the Torah. And it's all about the Jewish people. As they were leaving Egypt, they got to the Yam Suf, the Red Sea. And they were surrounded by the Red Sea, by the Egyptians, and by a very hostile desert all around them. As far as they were concerned, they were all going to die. They turned around to Moses and made the following statement, which is recorded in Parshat B'Shalach. And the Pasuk actually says the following. They turned to Moses. I don't know if they said it in unison, or one person said it, or they all thought it, but it's regarded as though they all said it. Were there no graves in Egypt, Moshe, that you brought us to die over here? What a strange comment. We have no graves in Egypt. Because there's graves in Egypt. They'd lived there for hundreds of years. Their parents are there and buried there. Their grandparents, their great-grandparents. Why would they think this? And Rashi actually answers, and the commentators say that this was a comment of rhetorical questioning. But there's a rabbi called Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, and he gives the following fascinating explanation of this verse. He says this verse is the first ever Jewish joke. Oh, I see, Moses. No graves in Egypt. Schlep us down to die over here instead. They were being sarcastic. They were laughing. What are you laughing for? You're about to die. And he says because there's a secret to Jewish history which starts at this point, which is the beginning of Jewish history, because we just left Egypt, about to receive the Torah, which is you're going to go through many, many difficult challenges, many, many hard times. And there's one thing that's going to get you through that, and that is a good sense of humor. And I always say this is one of the reasons that Jews become comedians. They just like it. It's in our spiritual, psychological, emotional DNA. We just have to laugh. What do you do when you laugh at something? I don't believe it. I'm laughing it off. This has no power over me. This cannot control me. I'm laughing at you, and I'm laughing at what you want to do to me. It's actually a sign, in this instance, of emunah, of faith. It's crazy, right? Rabbi Akiva, very famous story from the Talmud. Now we're going to jump forward to the end of the Second Temple period. Rabbi Akiva, we know, was looking at the ruins of the Beit HaMikdash. And it was destroyed. Remember, the Romans destroyed it, and he was alive. He's actually going to be killed not soon after this event, unfortunately, at the hands of the Romans. And he looks at the ruins of the Beit HaMikdash, and everyone's looking. Imagine the temple, it stood for hundreds of years, is now destroyed. Foxes are running in and out of the temple, which got a lot of Jews very excited about 2 years ago. There was like photos of a fox running around Temple Mount. So someone's like, wow, is this a sign of Rabbi Akiva's vision? Because he saw foxes too. I was like, no, it's just a fox running around Temple Mount. There's loads of foxes all over there. There's foxes in my backyard. What does that mean? So Rabbi Akiva saw this destruction, and what did he do? Very famous Gemara, end of Makot, I believe. He burst out laughing. But all of his friends and students are crying. And they turn around and go, what are you laughing for? And he's like, what are you crying? What are you crying? The temple is destroyed. Thousands of people killed, going to get kicked out of Israel. Who knows how long it's going to last for? This is the worst thing ever. And he says, that's why I'm laughing. You see, I'm laughing because I have a perspective that you don't have. You are stuck in the present. But I have a vision. He wasn't a prophet. He was a great rabbi, not a prophet. But I have a vision of the future. And my vision says to me that if these people are so bad, who destroyed so much of the Jewish people, who took all of these Jewish lives, who destroyed our holy temple in Jerusalem, can celebrate, it must be that we, God's eternal people, who were given the Torah for eternity, will one day come back and we're going to laugh. So at that moment, at the worst possible moment, he was able to take the scene that he was looking at, and everyone was crying and distraught and felt terrible, and he's like, that's now. But I know in the future, it's going to be good. I have that knowledge. I have that knowledge. By the way, Yitzchak means laughter, but there's actually two words intermingled into that one word. Can anyone figure out what two words we can see in the word Yitzchak? Yitzchak is made up of two words which are Ketz, Chai. Ketz, Chai. What's Ketz? Ketz is the end. Chai is life. Ketz is the end, Chai is life. How do those two things relate? So Ketz Chai means death in life. Death, the end of the process. It's come to a death, but it's in life. That's two contradictory terms. But if you look at the life of Yitzchak, it makes sense. Because he was the one who got to the Akedah, and he found death while he was still alive. He didn't die, but he was willing to, so it's as though he did. So he's considered Mr. Death in life. According to the Kabbalist, actually, spiritually, he was dead. We actually say in some of our prayers that his afar, his remains, are there on the altar. That's how they see it. So in a sense, he actually became so holy after this event that we don't hear too much about him anymore, and he's not allowed to leave the land of Israel. He became a korban, a sacrifice. He ended up leaving and getting married. But in a spiritual sense, the Zohar and others tell us, he died. Because machshava k'maaseh, what your thought is to do a mitzvah, even if you're prevented from doing that mitzvah, you get rewarded for it. So in his life, he was dead, because it was ketz chai.
Is that what he dug all those wells?
That was different. That was in order to, those were physical wells, but they represented something else.
But they also were, but the act of creating a well, you're taking like this dead ground, so
Yeah.
you're accessing life through it.
Nice idea. He was doing it for water.
Yeah.
He was doing it for water, for life. It could be. Yeah.
Do we know he was willing to die?
100%. He gave himself up willingly. He wasn't 8 or 9 years old. He was in his 30s. He understood exactly. I know how the movies depict him, but he was an older person. He understood, and he took. That's why it's called Akedat Yitzchak. Right? It's his challenge, really. Avraham was tested, but it was his challenge, and he gave himself up willingly in order to do it. As a side point, I will mention that he was prevented from dying because we don't kill our children for God. So this became a public display of what not to do. Otherwise, God would just say, take him to a cellar and, shoot him in the head or something. Why does he take him onto a mountain, Har HaMoriah, the future site of the temple, and attempt to kill him and then prevent him? So there's two things happening over here. One is a test for Avraham, because he felt he was going to and had to, but it was also a lesson for us, that we see this and be like, we don't kill our children for God voluntarily. Unfortunately, we lose our lives, especially now during war. But we want to live for God, not die for God. Unfortunately, many nations, ones that we're warring with right now, haven't actually picked up this point. Living for God is has a lot more valor than dying for God. Dying for God's easy. Right? You blow yourself up and that's the end of it. We don't want to do that. We don't want to live for God. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva, he sees this, he understands it, and he's able to put himself into the future. Yitzchak dies in the process. He finds life and death because he dies during life. He's a contradiction, and the two are contradictory. Giving birth at 90 is contradictory. Knowing you're going to be having a wife about to give birth at 100 is contradictory. That's what it's about. We are the people who live the contradictions. It makes no sense. Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva. And we did Sarah. Let's jump around a little bit more. Let's meet the person who really started the whole temple thing going, and that's King David. David HaMelech. David HaMelech also is going to be part of this process, which is what? So David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Shir HaMalot B'shuv Adonai et Shivatzin Hekachomim Az Yamales Chok Pinu. What's he talking about? So King David, although he didn't get to build the temple, he knew that it would be built, so he built the foundations, and his son Solomon, Shlomo Melech, was able to build it. But while he was even doing that, he understood that the temple would one day probably be destroyed, because you have to have great merit to keep the temple. And he wasn't convinced we'd actually be able to keep that merit. And he was right. And we'd have to be exiled. Let's go into Galut. I mean, Yaakov, right, did tell us that there were going to be various exiles we would have to go through. So he's like, you know what? It's true. We're going to. Az Yamales Chok Pinu. But there's going to be a time, B'shuv Hashem, when God returns us to the land of Israel, we are going to laugh. We're going to laugh when we build the third and final Beit HaMikdash. Why laugh? Why doesn't it say we're going to be happy? We're going back to Israel, Mashiach has arrived, we're now at peace, and we're going to build a temple, and all the Jews are here. let's be happy. It doesn't say that. It says we're going to laugh. There it is again. It's the same word that keeps coming again and again and again. Why are we laughing? The key actually is in the word az. Az is Aleph Zayin. That's a 1 and a 7. That makes 8. The word az always means into the future. Some point in the future, something's going to happen. Az Yashir Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu says, in the future, we're going to sing. David HaMelech saying, King David saying, in the future, we're going to laugh. There's going to be laughter. So we've seen Sarah, and Sarah Rabbeinu is saying, my son is Yitzchak. Yitzchak actually, at some point, that doesn't mean laughter, that's chok. It doesn't mean to laugh, that's lisachek. What is Yitzchak? There will be laughter in the future. It's future tense. Okay, let's add one last piece to this, and it's probably the most important part of the puzzle, and that is, what is the laughing holiday? Purim, for sure, right? That's the holiday we all laugh in. But if you look at the story of Purim, it is the unfunniest story in Jewish history. It's actually the most terrifying, menacing, potentially destructive. It's actually one of the few times in world history that the entire Jewish people were up for annihilation, because Achashverosh ruled over all the provinces where the Jewish people were living in. Haman got permission from him to destroy all the Jews wherever they were in these 127 provinces, and he says, they're all dead. So Esther comes along, and she saves the day. We all know the story, right? She is secreted in the palace. No one knows she's Jewish. According to another opinion, by the way, they did know she was Jewish, but they did not speak Lashon Hara and tell all of their evil neighbors that she was Jewish. They say, actually, this is one of the proofs that redemption comes through not speaking Lashon Hara, you see. We know that Lashon Hara and Sirat Chinam destroyed the second temple, but she was able to stay secret on her spy mission inside the palace of Achashverosh because no one told anyone that she was Jewish. Isn't that incredible? That means no one spoke Lashon Hara. It would have taken one person to speak Lashon Hara, and the whole jig would have been up. Maybe Haman would have figured out a way to kill her, but it was kept secret from him. In the merit of them not speaking Lashon Hara, she's going to end up saving the day, and they all, well, not all, but many Jews return to Israel, and that ends up becoming the second temple. So we see how no Lashon Hara leads to redemption. Can you see that? It's all connected. Anyway, so now Sarah Imenu saves the day. And Haman never saw it coming because no one spoke Lashon Hara. And that should be the end of the story. And yet, what do? We laugh at this. But what part of it is funny? It's like Charlie Chaplin said, it's the unexpected. It all turned around. The last person you expected to be Jewish was Esther. Who thought that she would be a Jewish woman? And that a woman would come and say, even she's married to Achashverosh? That's incredible. So, you know what we do? We laugh. Because every joke has 3 parts. A beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the setup. The middle is the main part of the joke. And the end is called the punchline. And the punchline must come at the end. If the punchline comes at the beginning, it's not funny. That's when I start telling a joke and someone calls out the punchline, that's really annoying, right? Because I want to leave the punchline for the end. If you start with a punchline, like in the scenario of Charlie Chaplin, if you start with a guy on the floor and he gets up, brushes off, and walks off, that's not funny. Because I need the punchline to come at the end. And it has to be unexpected. Like walking over the banana peel in order to get into the manhole, right? That's unexpected. That's what brings laughter. So this is actually a code, and we have to decode it together. And this is a code that has been passed down for thousands of years. It started with Sarah Imenu, and she's like, I know what my son is going to go through. I understand. I know the difficulty it took for me to give birth to this son. I know the challenges that my descendants are going to go through for thousands of years of history of exiles, pogroms, Holocaust, Islamic jihad. I understand. But don't worry. Yitzchak. Look at me. I'm an old woman. No one ever thought I'd have a child to continue off my people, my nation, and yet it happened. Yitzchak. She was not saying, I'm laughing now. She's saying that in the future, there is going to be laughter. King David was saying, right now, I understand you're upset that the Jewish people are going to be in exile, but they're going to come back and they're going to laugh. He's future-oriented. Rabbi Akiva, same thing. He sees the temple in ruins, one of the worst episodes ever in Jewish history, with thousands upon thousands of people dead, temple destroyed, about to go into exile for 2,000 years or so, and yet he is able to be like, I have a promise from my ancestors, from King David, from Sarah Imenu, that there's going to be laughter in the end. And Esther is part of that as well. Esther is basically proving to us, and this is the paradigm for all of them, which is why Megillat Esther, the Rambam says, is the only book that's going to be existing from scriptures, except the Torah, because the Torah is forever, after Mashiach comes. Because it's got inside it the secret of Mashiach's arrival and how to survive afterwards. That's very interesting. And so even Esther was worthy to understand that right now we're hidden, and right now we're in difficulty, and right now we're in challenge, but in the end it's all going to turn around. So the punchline of a joke turns everything around. I'll finish off with one last idea, just to tie this all together. And this comes from a rabbi called Rabbi Gedalia Shor. And he talks about what I've spoken about, although I've added some pieces to it. But he actually says that all of Jewish history, if you think about it, is one big joke. Right? There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And the beginning is a setup, that's Adam and Eve. And the middle is the meat where all the action happens. That is Abraham, which leads us right through to Matan Torah and the entry into the land of Israel. But then there's an end. Now, once again, if you stop reading the story halfway through, you're not going to appreciate it. You're not going to get it. It's not going to make any sense to you whatsoever. Why are the bad people successful? Why are the good people suffering? But you can't stop the movie halfway through. You can't stop your life and be like, why am I suffering? Because where's the end? You know, I had a very interesting story recently of a guy who went to one of his great rabbis to get advice. And he's telling about all of his problems. And he's telling about his problems. And he's telling about his problems. And then he finishes. And the rabbi says, but what about the rest of the story? He goes, there is no rest of the story. He goes, there is. It just hasn't happened yet. You see, we have this habit, we all do, that while we're in the midst of it, we're like, that's it, it's all over. How many times in your life have you done like, that's it, it's all over. This friendship, all over. This job, all over. This marriage, all over. Right? No matter what it is, this relationship, it's all over. And then you think it's all done, you give up, and you're like, forget about it. But that's only half the story. So where's the other half? It hasn't happened yet. If it's not good now, then it will, because in the end it's going to be good. That, my friends, is the secret of Jewish history, he says. He says there's a punchline that's going to come, like the last scene in the movie, like the last page of the novel, and it's all going to make sense. And it's going to come in a very unexpected fashion. That's really the secret. Because if it was expected, it'd be like hearing a joke for the second, third, fourth, or fifth time, and then it's not so enjoyable. So it's got to be a secret. Because by doing it that way, it becomes more enjoyable. So we can't stop Jewish history now and be like we hear many people saying, that's it, it's all over, we're all dead, there's no future for Israel, for the Jewish people, and anti-Semitism's everywhere. What? I mean, you think Rabbi Akiva didn't look at scenes much worse than we're looking at right now and laugh it off, and say, we're going to have the last laugh? Because you've got to wait to the end of the story. And we're getting close to that, my friends. I believe we're very close to that last laugh. Again, we're not laughing at other people. We're laughing inside ourselves out of the unexpected but highly anticipated ending to the story that is really Jewish history that we are pretty much at the end of right now, at least in this form. God willing, we will have the last laugh, and all the tears that we've shed over the past year, as King David says, Hazorim bedima, berina yiktsaru. We sow with tears in our eyes, but we reap with great joy and happiness and song. And that's going to happen, God willing, very, very soon. Have a great and wonderful night. Thank you.